just before I start, I was very happy that I was here earlier and I could hear the great panel and also the presentation now. Because when we're talking about what is happening in Dubai and why everybody wants to come to Dubai, we've talked about the events, we've talked about the ecosystem, we've talked about the incentives, we've talked about the capital flow, talent, and everything. What was missing is talking about how the legal system especially in the last 12 months, has evolved to welcome everybody to be participating or to be working here in UAE. So I'm going to do a quick touch-up. We lawyers normally don't do free advice, but I would like to tell you why UAE is now the right place, because along with what we discussed in the morning, if we can look at that, how easy it has become for one to start a business, how important it is, I know, because most of my clients being in the technology sector come and ask us about what happens to my copyright, what happens to my patent, what happens to my trademark, and how UAE has in the last few months, few years, evolved as the hub to come and set up here. So let's start with business setup in the UAE. Now, interestingly, in UAE, every company that we set up, which is a little different from what we see in the United States, in Europe, or everywhere else, where you could go and set up a company and decide later on what your company is going to do. So you could go set up a limited liability company, a partnership, or a C Corp, and then figure out what the company is going to do. Unlike UAE, where you first have to make up your mind that what is it that you're going to do here. So we have many types of activities, companies available here under the Commercial Companies Law. We've got many free zones. One, we heard about it in the morning. CVVC, what it's doing with DMCC. All these are different free zones where one can go and set up. So typically when a client approaches us and saying, I want to set up here, be it a startup, be it a renowned business, it's very important for you to determine your business activity, because it cannot be that today I'm a trading company, tomorrow I want to go be an e-commerce company. That would actually mean that you set up another company. Please identify what is your market. Are you looking at a GCC market, global market, or you want to offer your services just within a free zone or within UAE? And most of the startups, we come back and they come and ask us, but tell me which is the most economical free zone for me to go and set up my company. And our answer to them is always, don't go by just the cost, what offers, but also look at why you need to be in that particular free zone or why that particular Emirates to go and set it up. Identify business owners. Startups always come and ask, and everybody uses the term, oh, I want to be a director. Oh, I want to be a shareholder. Oh, I want to give away equity. Businesses don't run like that. So be very sure about what you're going to do with your business, who's going to be your business partners, and definitely have an end goal that you want to start a business here in UAE for all the great reasons. How are you going to sustain this for long? Just to briefly touch up here that we do have many laws and regulations that one needs to be aware of while doing businesses. Very important for all of us, which I say all of us because all of us here are entrepreneurs, are in high profile jobs where we should know what the law of the land is. Ignorance is not an excuse. So Commercial Companies Law, which I will touch more in details because it has recently been amended, and also what our civil transaction laws talks about. And interestingly, the value added tax, which came in 2017, and a lot of questions were asked around that. Now, for the mainland business, so in UAE, you know that you have free zones and you also have mainland businesses which can be licensed from an economic department of that particular emirate. There are some very important do's and don'ts. You need to understand that if you're an investor or you're an entrepreneur, you either will be a professional license or you will be a commercial license. We do get clients who are saying, oh, I'm going to provide DLT or blockchain as a service, but I'm also going to sell IT hardware. So we always can tell that client that these are two different activities. Most likely these will be two different licenses. So one needs to be aware of what the business is going to be. some of our clients have recently, I'm not very proud of it, ran into trouble. They had Dubai written in their trade license and they promoted it before they even got incorporated here. These are a complete no-nos. You cannot use any sort of words like Dubai, UAE, or any other which have a religious implication. So these need to be avoided. One of the things that we talked about in the panel before, where we talked about the virtual world and the real world, in the last 1 year, we've seen a lot of free zones, a lot of activities from even the Abu Dhabi courts, Dubai courts, where things have gone virtual. But we still have some requirements where a physical presence of a signatory is mandatory till now. So anytime anybody wants to set up a remote company and you have an agent and saying that pay me money and your company is set up, that's not happening. Process is to go through the Dubai Economic Department, be very clear about what your trade name would be, and then go ahead and apply for a license. Now, interestingly, there are very many different models which we see here. One is a pure licensing. So most of the technology companies like to go for this model and give out their licenses to be used. Their IP, the intellectual property, or their platform is used here. Then the public-private partnerships is something which recently started in UAE, I would say around 5 to 7 years back, which were the initiatives between government entities and private sector players setting up entities together and getting into the business. Joint ventures have been very popular, where we see either the technology or the skills or the capital infusion is coming from outside UAE. So it's a favorite for foreign entities to come and set it up here. So then they don't have to start from the scratch, but it's already a business that's running successfully outside and starts here in UAE. Now, franchising, interestingly, has been something which was very popular in UAE and was restricted mainly to UAE nationals, because under the commercial agencies law, this was only UAE nationals who could get a licensing or a franchising right to sell an international product, which have recently been amended. So these are the 4 main different types of businesses by which you can start your business here. Why free zones? Very interestingly, we have special tax, customs, and imports regime. Now, earlier we used to go and talk about free zones and saying, because in a mainland company, it's important for you to have a UAE national as your partner. We no longer say that because the amendment came in, I think, February of last year, and it's already been implemented, where you no longer need a majority shareholding to be held by a UAE national. Having said that, because most of the free zones are very sector specific, the entire ecosystem for you to run your business is just at a one-stop shop for you. So again, domain-specific free zones, they have their specific regulations, makes it easier for businesses to run their business. There's no export and import duties so far, other than on some goods and services, and 100% repatriation of capital and profits, which still stands out as a unique thing for UAE to offer. Now, when we talk about free zones, it's very important for us to understand that the financial free zones are different from what we have as the other free zones. So going on, we have ADGM and DIFC and DMCC, which are now gaining a lot of popularity because of this reason, that both in DIFC and ADGM, the applicable laws for all aspects is UAE laws, except for civil and commercial laws, which have been drafted on a common law principle specifically for both these IFCs. So you could be in a country like in UAE with a civil law jurisdiction, but run your business just like how you would run internationally on common law principles. Restrictions would be you're not allowed to deal in UAE currency. You would be dealing in USD or any other foreign currency. And you cannot take deposits from UAE markets because most of these offer financial services. And also, just to talk about, since the last 2 weeks, we've talked about blockchain and cryptocurrency and what's happening in the tokenization space. ADGM was the first financial regulator in the region to come out with a framework for how crypto-related or tokenization-related companies could set up. how the issuance of those tokens could be, how a crypto exchange, which is offering trading services, can be licensed and regulated. Call came out in ADGM, I think in the year 2018, has been amended after that twice, but has been quite aggressive in this space. And we're very proud to say, as of yesterday, even DIFC, under its DFSA, the financial regulator, has promulgated the regulations for tokenization of securities. So a lot of amendments have been done in the last, I would say, 5 to 6 months, that UAE has now become the hub for any company that is dealing in tokenization or in any crypto or a DLT blockchain company. And it all started with actually CBBC signing with the MCC and setting up the crypto center. Many of the free zones that we're aware of, which are here. So if you see it again, these are all very sector specific. So depending on your activity, you can choose which free zone to work with. Interestingly, now we get asked about a lot of this, that if I have an innovative technology and this has not been tried in the market before, there's a high possibility that there is no such activity available under UAE laws for one to set up a company. So UAE is one of the first countries globally to come up with what we call a sandbox regime. So we had the sandbox coming from the IFC, which is called the Innovative Testing Lab, and ADGM came out with what is called the Reg Lab, and ESCA also came out in 2018 with the FinTech Regulatory Framework. Interestingly, all these three collectively, and especially the IFC and ADGM, have been the forerunners in it, have allowed a lot of new technology to actually come in UAE, experiment and grow mature, and then finally get the license to operate not just in UAE, but across the GCC. Now, this is very interesting for you to just take note of, that the Federal Decree Law number 26 of 2020 made a lot of amendments to the Commercial Companies Law of 2015, where the amendments were made. So where you see that under Section 10, there is no longer a need for foreign entities to have a 51% or say a majority shareholding to be given to a UAE national. Now this has seen a huge FDI coming to UAE. So not just in the free zones, but in mainland, we see a lot of new companies which have come up. Also, the FDI list came out with the blacklist and the positive list of the positive and the negative list. The sectors in which expats can own their companies 100%. Also, initially, the investments or the investment in funds was restricted only to public joint stock company. That has been abolished. So now even LLCs or a limited liability company could be investing in funds on behalf of a third party. Again, amendments have been made to make sure that earlier, where a shareholder or a director, we had the definition of a sole proprietorship. That is a company owned by one individual. It could be a LLC. That was the amendment in 2015. 2020 amended it further and said even an expat can own a company 100% by just one single shareholder. Interestingly also, which is very important for any new business here in UAE to understand, that what's the role of the shareholders, what's the role of the directors, and who is ultimately responsible for the company. Now, responsibility of the management of the company lies in the manager. So the manager is responsible not only to the shareholders, the investors in the company, but also to third parties. So there's a huge liability that is there on the directors and the manager. So one should be aware of these. We've got many cases where expats have come and the managers did not know what's happening in the operations of the company, but that's no excuse. If the company's gone bust, it's the manager who's held liable. Trademark regulations, just to quickly cover. So registering a trademark in UAE has now got an impact by which your trademark protection is over 125 countries. This Madrid protocol by WIPO for trademark protection was signed by UAE just a few months back and will be effective from 28th of December 2021. So if you're a company that's registering your trademark here, you get protection in 125 countries. In GCC countries, Bahrain and Oman is the other signatories who have signed for it. And what is the relevant legislation? There was a lot of misconception where people thought that even if I'm a company operating in UAE, I need to do a trademark or a copyright registration outside UAE because we do not have strong laws. That's a misconception because we have very strong federal laws. We have the implementing guidelines way back since 1992. And DIFC has its own further special laws for intellectual property law. And all this is governed by the Ministry of Economy, which is one of the most forwarding progressive ministries to work with. Again, just to tell you that, interestingly, you could do a trademark for all these. You could do it for a name, birth, signatures, letters. Interesting queries are that, can I do a trademark for a sound? So a clarification in the law is provided that a sound shall be considered part of the trademark if it accompanies the mark. So it cannot just be a sound, but if you do have a logo which comes with a loud noise with it, that noise will be considered as a part of your trademark. Now, all these are there in the law. We have these cases which have been tried and tested in the UAE courts. So all these together make UAE actually the right place to work in for all the reasons that you've heard in the panels in the morning, plus what all you can do it in the law. Some of the legal tips coming for free. Be sure that when you're signing your contracts, make sure that you check the trade license, you check the corporate documents of the company, you make sure that you're checking the authority of the signatory. It's not that you are signing with the business development head and later on there's a dispute and the company says, well, the business development head was never authorized to represent the company. So make sure you check all these things before you go ahead and sign any business here in UAE. Understand the scope of transaction and possible variations. There are many lawyers who are now offering these services to startups to do either a pro bono or at a reduced cost, a legal consultation. So always a wise idea to check the law of the country before you go ahead and invest your money and time and start a business. One of the most important things, please, your technology, your details are your personal property. Make sure you sign the NDAs. Make sure you're ensuring that your rights are protected. So be best friends with NDA. IP assignments and licensing. Startups, we've seen an issue because they're in a rush and they get very excited with the first offer that they get along. They forget that the IP or the technology is all that they have. Couple of years down the line, by the time a VC is exiting, they realize that there is nothing that is left with the promoters of the company. So make sure that you've gone through the laws of the land before you go ahead and start a business. That's us. I've been here for the last 20 years working as a corporate commercial lawyer, and KARM is my law firm that focuses in the technology sector. Thank you.